You've been seeing his work blow up the past month or 3 weeks or so. His name is Dan Moore. He's a freelance writer based out of the Bay Area. Dan, how you doing, man? We've got to talk about a couple of your pieces that you just had. You had one in the Ringer 3 weeks ago called "When Fans Fight Back." It was a great chronicling of everything going on in Oakland. And then recently, this week, had another article about kind of the racket that private owners are doing with with public financing for their stadiums. You can find that in the Atlantic. Dan, how you doing, man?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me on, guys. I appreciate it. It's good to be here.
Yeah, thanks a lot, man. So I want to talk about. I just want to jump right into this Atlantic article that you just wrote, and my overall impression that I got reading that is like maybe like fans are smarter than before, or maybe fans are more aware than it was maybe in the 90s and even in the 2000s. And do you feel like maybe this little never-ending money pit is maybe running out for these private owners? We saw what happened with the vote in Kansas City. Do you feel like maybe something is changing here with the overall landscape as far as public subsidies and for stadiums?
I sure hope so. I think there's a few things going on. Owners tend to make these demands for hundreds of millions of dollars, in some cases billions of dollars of public funding for new stadiums anytime their lease is up. And so what you see happen is a sort of cycle where
Yeah.
every 30 years, which is the general length of the lease that owners will sign with cities and states, every time that's up, they're asking for new public funding. So the last time that this happened, really kind of at scale, was in the early 90s after the construction and perceived success of Camden Yards. So in that time, a few things have changed. One, as Hal will no doubt attest to, as our local economist, mountains of evidence have accumulated refuting the idea that owners and leagues put forth in support of these projects, that stadiums are massive economic generators for cities, that they, are silver bullets. All the evidence suggests that that is not true. And so taxpayers in all these places, I think, are both becoming more attuned to that evidence, waking up to the attendant costs related to these projects. And I think that what you're also seeing is a little bit of distaste for the extortion and the threats of relocation by which owners and leagues go about securing these deals. So what you're alluding to is this palpable pushback that fans
Yeah.
are like, wait a minute, this feels like a raw deal for us, and it just kind of sucks to live through. Like maybe there's a better way to do it. And the last thing I'll say is, on top of all that, the value of these sports teams
Yeah.
only continues to balloon inexorably. Every owner in the three most heavily subsidized leagues, NHL, NBA, MLB, is a billionaire themselves. And so there's a sense of, why are we doing it this way again?
Yeah.
So anyway, I hope that that's catching on. And
Yeah, absolutely.
it does seem like it is a little bit.
Dan, what was what's your background and how'd you end up becoming sort of the chronicler in long form essay form of Oakland A's fans fight for all this kind of stuff?
Man, well, I was born and raised in the East Bay, and so I come to all this as an A's fan, as an Oakland sports fan, and so I have to check my objectivity continuously because I feel personally, wronged by a lot of what's happening. So that's one reason that I am drawn to the story. But more professionally, I'm sort of a failed fiction writer. I studied fiction writing in college. My turn towards journalism started when every MFA program that I applied to rejected me, and so it was sort of like, okay, well, what am I going to do now? And it's sort of been a long road since then. I've was editing online magazines, taking whatever work was offered to me. And then about 5 years ago or so, I started writing for the Oakland side, and I kind of took up a bit of the sports beat there. And it just so happened that it was right around then that all the Howard Terminal stuff was just starting, and as it would happen, this story kind of just picked me up, and I traveled with it. I mean, I think if you take a step back, and certainly it's clear from where we're sitting now, I think the story of what has happened to Oakland sports writ large, but what has also happened to A's baseball and to the Oakland A's more specifically,
Yeah.
is it's a microcosm of so many things that are both wrong and kind of messed up with the sports industry and the way we relate to it as fans and taxpayers today. But it's also emblematic of certain of those intangible elements that make sports worthwhile. Like if you look at what the fans here have done and that part of the story, kind of the pushback, you know, that's sort of what it's all about. Look at the community that has bloomed in the face of all this, the BS from the A's owners. So, that's kind of a long-winded way of saying that I approached it just as a journalist, but I got really wrapped up in it, and I am genuinely fascinated and inspired by it.
Yeah, that's what I try to keep reminding myself. Like, what's happening right here? I feel like these fans are ultimately going to be remembered in this canon of all these fans that you wrote about in your piece in the Ringer. Like I learned a lot of stuff that I didn't know about. I never heard about the Tiger Stadium hug before, and just like reading details about the Save Our Browns and all that stuff. And do you feel like what A's are doing here will leave a legacy, whether the A's, no matter where the A's end up? Do you feel like what the A's the fans are doing here? Like even Hal was on TV last week in Baltimore with the flag and stuff like that. I mean, do you feel like it's gonna that the Cell movement's gonna be remembered in that canon that you described there?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, it's already been memorialized in the Hall of Fame. If you go back to the reverse boycott last year, but I think more genuinely, or generally, if you think of what we were just talking about, how these subsidies and the demands that are placed on fans, that happens every 30 years or so, right? Talk to sports economists; they all tell you we are on the brink of a huge stadium subsidy and extortion boom all over pro sports. So that means fan bases are going to be extorted all over pro sports in precisely the manner, in some cases, that A's fans have been. So what I think and what I hope will be the legacy of A's fans will be sort of carried on by other fan bases who look to the way that the 68s and Last Dive Bar and Hal have organized in the face of that. And the legacy will be, I think, in their success, right? Like if they employ some of these tactics to raise awareness of what's happening and push back against it, you could see maybe a culture change, a paradigm shift. And I bet a lot of that can be traced back at least to the sentiment and the model that's been offered here in Oakland.
What if I think it's really interesting to hear what the national perspective of this is like. So like what have your sort of editors, when you've put in these stories, and you're recently in the Atlantic for a kind of a short piece about just stadium financing in general, which like that's pretty sick. That's a great that's a real big, that's like a real publication, not just an internet publication. So
Right.
like what have when you've pitched stories about this, or brought stories to editors at these national publications, the Ringer, the Atlantic, maybe other places, like what are they interested in? What's their perspective been like?
Well, one thing, everybody is interested in the story of what has happened to Oakland as a city at the hands of pro sports, right? Like it is at once unprecedented in sports history for a major league city, Oakland, California, in this case, to go from being one of the mightiest in my sense, most representative sports towns in America to have been denuded entirely of its sports teams, right? To lose three institutions in a manner or in a time span of less than 10 years. I mean, that's never happened before. At the same time, the way that it's happened as I mentioned earlier, is I think emblematic of a lot of sort of the more pernicious elements of the sports industry. And so there's both a lot to kind of gawk at, like, oh my God, look at this. How did this happen? And then there's a lot to learn from it, right? It's a model in more ways than one. So I think there is something inherently and broadly interesting about that for sure. I'll also say that there's a sense that transcends region about like, oh, this kind of stuff could happen elsewhere. It will happen elsewhere. And so I think, several years ago, I was sort of waking up to this, like when the parallel paths and all those things were announced here in Oakland. I was like, I think that there's something larger happening here. It took a little while, but I think more and more. And by the way, at the hand and by the work that A's fans have put in, there's been an awakening to a lot of this stuff, and they've done a lot of work raising sort of the national consciousness of it, if you will. But now everybody is, kind of looking to what's happening here as a vanguard sort of what hopefully is a shift. So anyway, I think that there's a lot of interest in that beyond Oakland too.